If you get into fruit industry at all,
Yes.
apples, oranges, pears, peaches, etc., where they're doing sizing and or inspection, because they don't want to bruise the fruit, instead of putting a full T-cleat across there, they have a finger cleat set up, which is a base with a series of individual fingers coming up that get smaller in diameter as they approach the top, that they put across there so the fruit can lay in between the fingers. It'll hold it as it takes it up the incline. And that's the finger cleat we're talking about here.
Okay.
Okay?
Sidewalls. Corrugated sidewalls. What's the purpose of a sidewall on a belt? Keep the product contained. Okay, so that could come in various heights, recessed in from the edge. Why would you recess them in from the edge? Go ahead. For the return side. Okay, and a lot of times you'll have cleats in between here too. Okay, but you need to apply sidewalls in such a way that they can contain the material. It allows you to carry greater capacity than you could even on a trough belt. Plus, you're able to go on inclines like this, like this, like this. I think the highest incline I ever supplied one for was a 90-degree incline. Yeah, this is a corrugated sidewall. And again, this can be done both in thermoset and thermoplastic. There's a lot of thermoplastic that is done without any base. It's just a ribbon that is applied to the edge of the belt without any base on the sidewall itself.
Cleats typically have a base that is wider than the cleat itself. I guess that's how I would make the differentiation between cleat and lug. Lug is as wide as it is tall, pretty much.
I think that's what you're referring to right there, as a lug.
A lot of times they're round,
Yeah.
like a peg.
Yep, like
You just
this.
have a whole bunch of them across the belt. Instead of calling them a finger, which would be long, a lug might be short.
Yeah. There is a dome-shaped type cleat as well.
Typically as wide as they are tall would be a lug.
And they require, the base of those things is wider in some cases than the comparable height of a cleat would be without a base. With a base, and flex more readily than this. You think you've got all this material has to go around and not break the bond. Used a lot it's used in thermoset and thermoplastic.
Yeah, what happens with a lot of this, you'll hear them referred to as lug cleats when it's for conveyor belt. When they refer to them on a PU timing belt, they just call them lugs. So if you've got a PU timing belt with lugs, what they're talking about is something that's shaped similar to what Roy's drawn up here at the top, but it's on PU timing instead of a standard conveyor belt.
Yeah.
You'll also hear some other terms meaning the same thing. In the modular belt industry, they call them product supports. They don't call them cleats, they call them product supports. You'll also hear them referred to as pushers, because they're pushing something, a product, as it's going up an incline.
I already talked about thermoset, thermoplastic. It's available both ways. Spill edges, again, many times this is referred to as vanners. Instead, on a conveyor belt, you put an edge on the belt. It can be like this. All right, guides. What's the purpose of a guide on a belt?
To assist it in tracking.
To what?
To assist it in tracking.
To assist. That is the right term to use, to assist in tracking. One of the big mistakes that's made is if you think that's going to solve a tracking issue. It's to help guide it and keep it in a direction. But it's never intended to be the sole purpose. You've got to pay attention to the rest of the design in order to make sure it tracks. Because even with a V-guide on the bottom, okay, we're doing this. It runs in a pulley, and that pulley, or that groove, is wider than the guide itself. Never let anybody put a C-section V-guide on a belt, or an A-section or a B-section V-guide on a belt, and then cut the groove and the pulley the same size. It's been tried. It's not a drive belt. And what will happen is you'll tear the V-guide off if it's not allowed to move some.
It's a common mistake, Roy.
Yeah, it's a common mistake.
The guys in the plants want a belt with a V-guide on it, so they send the pulley out to their machinist and say, I'm going to put a B-section
Yes.
V-guide on this, and they cut it to the B-section profile,
Right.
which is meant to transmit power,
And
it
yeah.
won't work.
And I believe in our technical brochures there is a recommended, I think it's in there. And some of the tech bulletins,
Yeah, how much bigger the
how
groove
much bigger
should
it has
yeah.
to be.
It's not a replacement for square, level, and plumb.
No. I said the side, the bottom, is also critical. It's got to be deep enough. It's got to be deep enough so the belt that the V-guide does not bottom out. Because if it does, what you'll see, evidence of that, is you'll have a humping effect here, and you'll have a longitudinal failure on the top of the belt at that point, because you've created a high point, stresses in the cover.
You know, you guys that are installing belts and things too, I always watch the shop for people that ordered endless belts with V-guides. And an endless belt that has a V-guide applied has to be put on endless, right?
Right.
So you have to pull shafts out to do that. What the maintenance guys won't do is they'll pull the shaft out, put the belt on, and put the shafts back in. When they put the shafts back in, they have no way of knowing if those grooves on the pulleys are lined up, right? So what happens is they put it all back together again. The grooves on the pulleys aren't lined up, they're a little bit off. And the V-guide wants to run in one groove but not in the other, and all kinds of problems. What should happen, especially on belts that have V-guides that are made endless, is you pull the shafts, you put them back in, line the grooves up, and peen them or mark them so you can get them back to where you know they're lined
Straight
up again.
up.
Then assemble everything back up with your belt in there. Most maintenance guys don't think to do that. They put the endless belt on with the V-guide. They put the shafts back in, they don't get them lined up, and then they either grind the V-guide down to nothing,
Yeah.
or it won't ride in one groove and out of another, and it's nothing but trouble.
Yeah, you can troubleshoot a V-guide that's been mistracked is by looking at the wear. Looking at how it's failed. Again, this is another thing in troubleshooting. Again, they can be of the same materials. Thermoset, thermoplastic, V-shaped, shaped like a V, and come in sizes ranging from the, what's this, K4? What's this? What's K4? Metric. Gold star. Okay. So K4, top width and thickness. So it's 6 millimeter wide, 4 millimeter thick. So a 2215 is 22 millimeter wide, 15 thick. A little conversion factor that I always like to be able to convert millimeter to inches. Take 0.03937. 0.03937 times the millimeter width, and you will have the decimal equivalent. Okay? That's important because you're going to get conveyor belts that they give you the millimeter dimensions, and you're going to want to convert that to inches. The common are the A section, which is what it's saying here. The A is close to the K13, and the B section is 17 millimeter, very close to the 5/8. Okay, round shape extrusions, we already talked about that, from 1/8 inch up to 3/4 inch. They're round shaped, and they use as cleats or edge retainers. Rectangular or square, that came up earlier. Other types, there's V-guides that are used that are actually flat, and they have ribs on them. They're just, anybody know what a poly V-belt is?
Yeah.
Essentially, it's like that. It's just a little V-guide that
So it's horizontal. It doesn't go along with it. It goes across the.
it actually goes longitudinally with the belt.
Oh, you're having
But-
horizontal.
This can be used as a V-guide on a belt. And it'll allow it to go around small pulleys. That's one of the purposes of having that flat V-guide. Used a lot in the baking industry. But there's all kinds of different ways of applying material to belts. But you just have to keep in mind the thermoset, thermoplastic. How are you going to apply it? Perforated belts for a vacuum, yeah.
In a bakery, you'll see the perforated belt with a cup and a grommet, and it pulls
Yeah.
the loaf of bread out of the pan.
Oh yeah, depanner belts.
Depanner belts.
Yes. And it just says they can be in various shapes, yes. They can be slots. Could be a slot, if necessary. A lot of times it's critical if you've got a vacuum belt that it's punched properly so it lines up with the conveyor bed. You mess that up and you don't have a vacuum belt. There are conveyor belts that are made with holes on the outside edge to actually keep them and run precisely together to pull material through,
Like computer paper.
like a computer paper. It'd be the similar thing. But those are some tractor feed belts.
One thing, when you punch holes in that belt, now the belt's not quite as strong as it used to be. You've eliminated perhaps 60 to 80% of the tensile warp members. And so you're adding to that load as well, because what you're doing is you're providing a suction. And suction increases friction, and friction increases power requirements to drive that belt. So you have to make sure you size that belt properly when you do this. Otherwise, it'll stretch like crazy and tear apart. You can start over.
The last one we have here is custom covers. That's applying another material on top of a belt. Could be a natural rubber, could be a latex, synthetic material, could be sponge, could be about anything. That you actually adhere it to the top of the belt to create another type of a carrying device. Kind of an unusual application I can think of is putting large foam on top of a belt that's then slit to width to carry material. The loops. It's kind of what I considered that a loop belt can be a cleat that's been formed, and it talks about it having sponge or something put inside it to help cushion the material it's carrying. That would be a way in which you could use a loop belt or loop cleat. Creates compression. One time, I had a cleat that I worked with that was kind of shaped like that. It was a scrapable cleat. So you could take a scraper and run it on here, and it would come down the backside. It's very slow moving. Okay. So you'd have the scraper go up the cleat and follow it down. Just another way of doing it, because it was a sticky application. But it took a special mold to create that molded product. Scrapable cleat. Sealed edges. A lot of it is in dairy because they want to make sure that there's no bacteria growing inside the belt.
Wash down
Yeah.
anywhere the belts are wet, meat, fish, dairy, poultry.
Would you like to use a nylon carcass in a food belt that's getting washed down? Why? Why do we say
This is hydroscopic.
it's hydroscopic? What does that mean? It absorbs water. So no nylon would be very good, even polynylon, because you'd still have nylon. And all polyester would be better. But that sealed edges are simply to seal that edge to prevent fabric from being exposed to moisture or anything else that would tend to want to wick in on the fabric itself.